Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
My friend, the most beautiful man in the world.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Kurt.
By the most beautiful man in the world. I love this.
You know.
Yeah. I love it. I love that.
You're crazy.
Oh.
It's good to see you, buddy.
You too, man. This is good.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to get to spend time with you and Amy and get to do this podcast and I keep thinking about the time that we had the first episode of this season where we got to be with a room full of 500 of the people that have listened to the podcast, and just how awesome that was, but also how surreal it was in a lot of ways. But we do really appreciate you, the most interesting listeners, the most beautiful listeners in the world. We're so grateful that you all are tuning in and listening to this week after week, and we're super grateful for you, Kurt, and thank you for all the wisdom that you bring. And
well, I also want to say, I've had the opportunity. We're recording this in mid-February, and I've had the opportunity even since our initial episode of this series to travel some places, and where people have been very kind and generous in their words as they describe what it's been like to listen in to this series. And I just want to say to our listeners, thank you so much for your feedback. Thank you so much for the words of encouragement that you've given to us. Thank you so much for passing on to other people. I mean, there have been a number of people who've attended speaking engagements, and they say, "Yeah, I didn't know anything about your work. The first thing I heard about you was a friend of mine, turned me onto the podcast." And then they typically go on to say, "So I was really kind of disappointed that Pepper wasn't here when you came. I just figured you guys kind of came as a team everywhere you go." And I said, I hear that a lot. Thank you. And I'm glad that I do hear that a lot. And I really do hear that a lot. And so I just want to say, it's so good to. I feel like we do have a community.
For sure.
That is encouraging us and enabling us to feel like we're trying to, steward this work and to follow the footsteps of the Spirit is cutting a path in front of us. And so thank you to our listeners for so much what makes this work so joyful. Really grateful.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, today we're talking about, in this season, Rupture and Repair. If you're just jumping in right now, we're glad you're here, but you might want to go back to episode 1 of this season because it is a lot of information. You may think that Rupture and Repair is a simple process, and we have come to find out that it's a beautiful process, but it requires a lot of our attention and our work, and there's a little more to it than you may have thought. So today we're going to be talking about Rupture and Repair in community, which is a very important place to be repairing.
And it's, enough so that it's going to be coming to us in 2 parts. This episode is the first part. There will be a second part that will be dropping next week, a second episode regarding Rupture and Repair in community, because there are a number of different levels at which what we're trying to get at with this. And we'll begin, as we often do, in just reminding ourselves that the Being Known podcast lives in this realm in which we begin with a Christian answer to the question, what does it mean to be human? And we look to the biblical narrative for that, and then that's what shapes our understanding of the neuroscience that we talk about, the interpersonal neurobiology, in addition to the relational dynamics that occur for us. And so we also, once again, turn to the first page of the Bible in considering rupture and repair in community, because we learn in Genesis 1, verse 26, that let us make mankind, that the God of the Bible has created us in community. Who we are is only to be understood in the context of community. I can only understand myself as a male because there are females in the world. I understand myself as a particular ethnicity because there are other ethnicities in the world. I understand that I have certain qualities because there are other people who are different than me. And this is hugely important, that we are made as God's image bearers as a communal being. I do to a certain extent. I bear God's image. Kurt does. Pepper does. But to some extent, like, I can only bear God's image more fully to the degree that, like, you're actually in the room reflecting things, and Amy's in the room reflecting things. And our minds also, like, reflect our embodied existence, our embodied experience, in the same way that, like, I have different parts of my mind, different parts of my brain that only are going to function well when there are other parts of my brain, the part of me that senses and images and feels and thinks. Each one of those, left on their own, those neural networks that represent all of that, if they're only all by themselves, like if I'm only a sensing being, I'm not going to be much of a human.
Right.
If I'm only a thinking human, I'm not going to be much of a human. And so one of the things that we then want to acknowledge is, because we begin the notion that my sense of who I am, my awareness of who I am, even though I live in a culture that would like to tell me that I am a siloed individual who is master of my destiny, I get to decide. I by myself make decisions about all kinds of things. The reality is, from a neurobiological standpoint, that just simply isn't true. It's like pretending that we live on a planet with no gravity. No, that's not the planet that we live on. We live on a planet in which rupture is never a private affair. It's never just between me and somebody else. It's, first of all, when rupture happens between me and another person, it's already happening within my own mind, within my own brain. I've got all of my stress hormones that flood. I've got all the disintegrating neural network patterns that are kind of making it difficult for me to live in the world. And plus, then I have the interpersonal rupture that takes place between me and another person. But there's no way that doesn't affect my other relationships. If I have been hurt by someone, I'm going to walk into the next thing that I'm going to do, carrying that with me. If I've had a rupture with a patient at 2:00, like, I'm not going to be able to just, like, put that in a closet for my 3:00 patient. Like, I'm going to have to do something with that. Invariably, it's going to affect. Now, maybe I'm able to hold that and contain that effectively enough, but it means that's energy that is not available for the work that I have to do with a 3:00 patient. It doesn't mean that I can't do that work, but it means I have to marshal more energy to do these kinds of things. And so we recognize that no rupture, even between two people, is ever done in isolation. And our neural ruptures are always a mirrored image of our interpersonal ruptures. What's happening between me and others is always happening within me, so that even the community that makes up my own head, makes up my own process.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't want to be in this family.
It's crowded.
In here.
It's crowded.
Dude, man, yeah. It is. And so we then have to recognize that rupture is always, to some degree, is always corporate in nature. And that's important because the greater the mass of the rupture, the more challenging is the repair. If you have a small rock that's the size of a football that tumbles off the side of a hill and lands in the ditch beside the road, that's one thing. If it's an entire mudslide, that's a different thing altogether. It's the same physics. It's the same, it's the same geographical place. It's the same gravity that's pulling it, but, like, it is not the same consequence.
Right.
But it's also equally true that where those kinds of things happen in those communities, there's also greater power in the repair, when the repair is done well. Mm-hmm. You have two people who repair things. People who live in the next house might not know anything about that. But when you enter into the Truth Commission in South Africa from decades ago, this becomes something that, even though done perhaps imperfectly, that it is being done because of the mass effect of the trauma, the mass effect of the rupture of apartheid. When you have people who are moving to repair that, it has echoes around the world. It gives, there's the mass effect of the repair also has great power. So we recognize that healing also then, in the same way that rupture is never a private affair, healing is also never a private affair. And it reflects our creation and our ruptures. And in some respects, this is the essence of the gospel, that the healing of a corporate rupture be through individual repairs. In our last episode, I mentioned that not long ago there was a rupture between myself and one of our other members in one of the confessional communities that we lead. But I also said, yes, there was an individual repair work that had to take place between me and that person. It was necessary. But it necessarily was going to involve everybody else. Yeah. I wasn't just apologizing to that person. I had to apologize to the rest of the community because, it's like they get to watch the drive-by shooting. I wouldn't characterize it like that, but they get to witness the rupture, and that's not very fun for them to watch Dad get really mad at one of the kids in a way that is unhelpful.
Yeah, I think I shared a story with you that at one point my boss and I had a rupture and went through a process of repair, and I through some of the work that I was doing, I was recognizing that I was reacting to something that wasn't even really happening in the room and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, we had a whole team meeting and sort of replayed this and went through both the rupture and the repair with everybody to see, because part of what we're trying to do is, in the culture of our company, we're really trying to be a company of repair. And so to sort of show this to them in this community was pretty powerful. It was a pretty powerful thing. And it allowed everyone to be able to see in themselves and in one another maybe some areas where they were getting things wrong or telling themselves stories and all this kind of stuff. It was great. It was great. It wasn't the most comfortable thing to do, but it was great.
Right. This brings us to Matthew's gospel, where Jesus says, wherever two or more are gathered.
Right.
This is something for us to keep in mind. When we asked, remember, we were approaching this question of rupture and repair by first beginning with the question of, as Jesus followers, what does it mean for us to be human? And to be fully human means that we are being turned into full likenesses of the Son, full likenesses of Jesus. And what does it then look like to be like Him? And He says, wherever two or more are gathered, there I am. And if there are two or more of the gathered that are having a rupture or having, He's there. And so what does it mean for us to recognize that this notion of Trinitarian life, that Father, Son, Spirit are always together, and Jesus is modeling this for us. You and me, this is how we're going to do life, which means if ever you're going to involve yourself in anything, I am always going to be present. The question is, am I paying attention to this? Am I paying attention that the Trinity is loving one another? Even in the course of ruptures, that they enter into our ruptures that we have with each other, that we have with God, and they're coming with a non-anxious presence. They're coming with a rupture. And so we can imagine, what does it mean for me? It requires work on my part to remember that no rupture takes place in privacy. Right? It doesn't happen in privacy. And the beautiful thing about the notion of Trinitarian work is, in order for me to live fully into who I am, right from the very beginning in Genesis 2, that they were naked and unashamed, this nakedness means I need your help and I need your protection. That's what my nakedness means. I am vulnerable. And I especially need your help and your protection in the process of repairing ruptures. And we need to protect each other from, there are these two extremes that can happen, and they can happen in the context of community. And one is the extreme of narcissism. Now, my friend Chuck DeGroat, for instance, has written a powerful book called When Narcissism Comes to Church. And for those of you who don't know it or haven't read it or don't know about Chuck DeGroat, I would invite you to check out that book. And what we're saying is that there is a form of narcissism that kind of gets crystallized and distilled, and there are certain people who live that way most of their lives. But I think it's fair to say that Every human being on the planet can have moments when we behave narcissistically, when I behave as if what I want, what I feel, what matters to me and me alone is the only thing that matters. This is what we otherwise call toddlers.
Right.
And so, I mean, another way to say it, like, well, Kurt, you're being so narcissistic. A nicer way to say it is to be like, Kurt, you're being so 3-year-old.
Right.
I don't know if I would like that any better.
I don't think so. It doesn't sound nicer to me, but yeah.
I don't know, but it is true. Developmentally, this is what we're saying. We're saying that we're protecting against our capacity to leave ourselves underdeveloped. Right? I can say that so I need to be protected from my tendency to do that. But I also need to protect myself from the tendency of isolating myself. Like, I'm not gonna feel this at all. I'm not gonna work on. I'm just gonna continue to live as if nothing's happened. We can do those two. Those are two extreme ways in which we disconnect, we disintegrate from one another. And so, being aware that the corporate nature of God is in the room and at work is really important. And then we want to dive right into this notion of how there is a particular power that takes place with public ruptures. I've had a number of patients who have experienced unspeakable trauma when they are, they remember as kids growing up in families where they have witnessed one or both parents committing violence toward the other. Or committing violence toward one of their siblings. It's not even directed at them.
Right.
But this is just so painful, because where are they going to, the very place where they would typically go for help when something wrong happens is the source of the violence. And that kind of a rupture then can be passed down, and it leads then families become models for how the public sphere, how we enter into repairing ruptures in the public sphere. So if we've grown up in families where there was trauma that was never really repaired, that's going to form how we even think about what rupture is and what we do to repair it. And if we've had, a lot of times, we have people who will, to describe their family trauma, and we discover, their parents were not the first, right? Their parents are the grandchildren of the people who first committed the violence, and then their parents committed the violence. Their grandparents did, and then their parents committed, and so there's this trickle down experience generationally, epigenetically. This notion of what I would call quantum relationality, this notion that there's all this spoken and unspoken, verbal and non-verbal ways in which both genetically and relationally we pass on to the third and fourth generation, which is what we read about in Exodus and Deuteronomy. This notion that God has built into the fabric of the creation that I can't escape the fact that we are corporate beings. And when I commit violence, my sons, my grandsons, my great-grandsons, my great-great-grandsons are going to be drinking that water that I'm dumping into the creek. And so, we've mentioned before on our podcast the book It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wallen. And this, I think, it's a really helpful resource for us to go back and recognize if I want to repair ruptures, sometimes those ruptures happened to me 80 years ago.
Right.
I wasn't even in the world by a long shot. And so there's work that I have to do to pay attention to how there is power for disintegration or integration because of how the quantum relational effect travels downstream. And then we also know that it can sometimes pick up speed. And, it's like, the avalanche starts as one snowball and ends with acres of snow that are falling. This mass effect. So what we're talking about here is we're paying attention to this because we want to be attuned that I might want to repair something with someone, but I may not be aware that actually I have to be aware that there are systems that are involved here that are adding to the possibility and predictability of ruptures, or even sustaining them or preventing the repair, that are not just about me and the other person. I worked in another city for a couple of years after residency, and I had the privilege while being there of seeing a number of patients that all worked for this one particular company. It was a multinational company, well known. And I saw people at all different levels within that company. I saw executive vice presidents, I saw secretaries, I saw a janitor, I saw like different, and it was so striking because they all had different particular presenting issues. But one thing that was all in common is that they had the common sense that whoever they were working for was not somebody that they thought they could trust. That there was this felt sense that whoever their boss was really gunning for them.
Up the chain, like not
all the way up the
like
chain.
This was the culture. It wasn't like one person that was doing all this. It was boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
Right. And so at some point you're like, as it turns out, it's not just a thing between you and your boss, because your boss is probably experiencing the same thing that you are.
Right.
These ruptures are happening continually, and they're coming from the top. And so it's really challenging when you start to pause and pull the camera back and recognize, we've got a whole system here that even non-consciously and unaware of itself is practicing rupture and preventing repair. So even while it says ostensibly and is advertising to the outside world about what a wonderful organization it is. Mm-hmm. These things happen. So it's important for us to pay attention to the systems, whether it's at work, school, neighborhood, and then the church, which we are going to commit an entire episode to in our next. So for our listeners, we're going to get to that in particular. But we can then see how systems can support and strengthen ruptures. And just a word here that there is a particular system, and that's the virtual world in which we live. So this is social media and emails and all the things that, as we'll see when it comes to repair, makes it particularly difficult because it is so disembodied.
Right.
It, as the one author put it, it is a web of our own making, mm-hmm. in which we create ruptures in that context, and the very nature of the medium, as we said in one of our previous episodes, the very nature of the medium makes it virtually impossible to repair the ruptures, because I can't be in the room with that person in an embodied state. This brings us then to a passage of Scripture which we want to just recognize that though it applies to us as Jesus followers, it also is quite applicable in any system in the world, whether we were people of faith or not. And this is Matthew 18, verses 15 to 17, which many of us will be familiar with. And we read it, "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you." Sounds pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. Makes sense?
Yep.
If they listen to you, you've won them over. If you repair, great. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along. This is where we're saying, we're going to acknowledge that we want a corporate involvement. Notice Jesus does not say, if you don't win them over, just yell at them more loudly. Mm-hmm. Right? He's calling on the relational mass effect of what we're talking about. And then, if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. We want to bring people, not just, and we would just say, it's not just about like naming the facts. Who's right, who's wrong. It's also about creating relational ballast of comfort and confidence so that we can work this out. That we can say, we're not leaving the room. We are not leaving the room. We want good things for you. We're not here, Kurt, just to make sure that we know that you confess your sin. We're not here to press that, nor are we here just to say, we're here to make sure that you know that you're okay and that Stan is the one who's in the wrong. What we're really doing is we're really wanting to create goodness and beauty here for both of you. But we know that it's going to take several of us to pull this off. If they still refuse to listen, Jesus says, tell it to the church, making it public. And of course, this is this. We just have complete allergic reactions to this. This is why we have HR departments. It's not the only reason we have HR departments. But we want to keep this. We want to keep this private. We want to make sure that nobody knows about any of this. I'm aware of a current situation with a patient of mine in which this is one of the things that's happening. Their HR department is working really so hard to work things out between the parties that the infection of the original rupture continues to work its way throughout the entire body of the organization. And because we don't have much practice saying we're going to bring this together in public, and of course we have just visions of the scarlet letter, right? We have visions of this is we're going to tar and feather somebody, and we want to say it's because we don't have practice knowing how do we do this publicly with loving kindness about anybody for whom this is a really difficult thing. And so then we get to this question of okay, well, we recognize that things happen in a corporate setting. We know that we want to lean on the community to enable this corporate. We'll lean on this community for repair. I may have told this story once. A colleague of mine was on sabbatical. They were a professor. He and his wife were they were in sabbatical in Africa, in South Africa for a year, and they became part of a church fellowship while they were there. And their work in the university here in the U.S. is on a conflict resolution, and so there was they were notified by the pastor of this church, this African church, Black African church. The pastor said, "Hey, we're gathering at so and so's house this afternoon. We'd like you to come because there are some things we want to work out. Your conflict resolution folks, we want you to come." And so they did, and they're just thinking oh, it's going to be the pastor and us. We're going to come and talk to this, And it turns out there was a couple that was having a conflict in their marriage, and so my friends, they arrive, and then 6 other couples arrive, and when they do, the women take the wife in the couple that's having the conflict into another room. The men take the husband, and they spend an hour, 2 hours, these two groups talking with each other. Then they all come back, and the husband and the wife don't say anything. But the 6 men and the 6 women of these couples, they start to talk. They have conversation with each other. Wow. And the husband and the wife are just somebody else is telling our story for this. And I think they gathered 1 or 2 more times but this is an ongoing process. And my friends, when they came back, they reported we've never seen anything like it. When the community owns, they're not there just to point out. It's not like the men are just defending the man and the women are just. Right. It's like the men. They're naming. They're naming things. They're naming things that the husband has done wrong, and they're naming things that she's done wrong. They're naming what they want. But because the couples themselves are having sometimes such a hard time because they're so caught in the rupture, the others have the capacity to name what they want, what they're afraid of, what they're willing to work on, so forth and so on. And my friend said later that the pastor said to them, "I cannot afford to lose one marriage in my church. If we lose a marriage, we begin to lose the church." And this, again, is an example of how the community comes together and creates space for healing to happen. And so we're leading. This is what they were doing in this. They were leading with loving kindness and a non-anxious presence. They weren't coming there to yell at the couple. They weren't coming there to say, "You need to get your stuff together." They were coming there to say, "We love you. We want good things for you, and we're here to help it happen."
They were coming there for repair.
That's right. That's what they were coming for. And they then were what we want to do in a community. And this is what's so hard because we don't have a lot of models for this. I will say, again, another shout out to the folks at the Colossian Forum and my friend Michael Gulker. I mean, the Colossian Forum is a great resource for communities that are trying to come together and understand each other when they have different ideas within their congregations or within their systems about all kinds of things, whether it's about race relations, whether it's about sexual ethics, or a range of different things, that these people are really doing this kind of work of repairing ruptures in many respects. They're creating a container that's held by someone, often more than one person, other than the parties that are involved. Now, some of our listeners who might be hearing this are like, How do you do that? I don't. That group back in that city that I lived before, like they're like, I guess this is a good idea, but like I don't know who in this company would be doing that. We recognize that. We're recognizing that. But this is what we want to invite people to do in this community. The community as a whole wants to be aware of the layers and the domains of rupture that are involved. So there's the surface events. This is what happened between John and Sarah. This is what happened between George and Stan. These are the things that happened. But we also, if I'm going to enter into repairing a rupture corporately, I want to be aware of the sensations, the feelings, the perceptions that are associated with the events, right? Because there can be a rupture that's taking place. But even like that very, the rupture that we go back and cite that we talked about in our very first episode that you and Amy and I worked through. Mm-hmm. Underneath all that is the story that I'm forgettable. And that's not about you and Amy. Like there's nothing I know that in your mind, in her mind, I know that that's not the story, but that's the story that is being that gets activated and comes into the room. So I have to be aware of what I'm sensing and feeling and so forth, so that I'm not just immediately telling a story of what Pepper and Amy think. Mm-hmm. I have to be aware. What am I sensing? I want to pause and just be aware of that, as opposed to what did he say? What did I say? What did we do? And then the stories that emerge from that. And even this is a story that can emerge that I'm not even aware that I'm telling, but that story in that instance was like, I'm forgettable. It's not true. I mean, that's an unclean spirit talking to me. That's an unclean spirit hijacking old stuff for me. And those then underlying implicit narratives of the things that we bring into the room that's taking place. Now, this is not a substitute. There are those things that really did happen in the room. Somebody really did speak to somebody in an extraordinarily harsh way that's not okay. That has to be owned. So we're not saying that we're starting with the surface events only to work our way to what's underneath because only what's underneath is important. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that there are multiple layers of things that are important that we have to keep paying attention to. And the last thing is we do have to be aware that evil is always at the ready. And unclean spirits are always going to be at the ready. And so I want to be able for us to pause and say, look, when there is a rupture and you long for a repair, the moment you become aware of any part of you that longs for repair, evil is going to double down. And evil is going to want to go to work even in the midst of your repair work. And it's going to want to hijack all kinds of things. And so we have to be mindful enough to be aware that all of those things that had me wanting to hold a grudge, had me wanting to repeat the offense, had me wanting to worry about not being received, all those things, I have to pause and be aware how much of this is being hijacked, how much of this is being, there's an unclean spirit that's part of this. Because that's part of what's happening. That's one of these layers. Surface layers, emotions, sensations, perceptions, the stories that emerge from the emotions that I tell, the underlying implicit narratives that are from my own developmental story, and the presence of unclean spirits. And as we said before, we then want to name in advance what we want. I want to go back and, again, replaying this event that happened in the confessional community that I caused, not that long ago, and to be able to say, I remember another one where I led with, I just want to let you know, first of all, just saying that I was sorry for what I did, but I also want to let you know that when we're done, I really want you to know that I want to be more connected to you. I really feel the distance right now, and what I really want is to be more connected to you. We want to name what we want. I'm going to name what I'm afraid. I'm afraid that you're maybe not going to want to be connected to me, and that's why I really want to repair this, because I don't want to lose you. I'm afraid of losing you. So we name what happened, remembering that that's important, but it's not always the most important. What happened is not unimportant, but remember that we're getting to other things that are also involved that we just named, right? And then we enter into what we just talked about, that list of things. Can we talk about what happened? And here's what I felt when this happened. I want to be empathic with the other when they're telling me what I felt. I want them to be empathic with me. I want to be empathic with them. I want to be able to say, yeah, that makes sense that you would feel that way given what I did. That's tricky, because there is the part of me that worries that when I say that makes sense, that I'm also agreeing with your interpretation of who I am or what I did.
Right.
So we are validating the underlying experience, but not necessarily, this does not mean that we are agreeing with them about, like, they said, well, I felt misunderstood. Okay, I can understand that. Or I felt judged. When the reality was, like, that's not at all what I was doing. So we have to do some work of separating what they felt from what I did. Yep. Separating that to validate what they felt while working really hard to make sure that I'm not, taking on ownership for something that doesn't belong to me. And then we move toward even further, what we most deeply want. And we can do, when we do this in the context of community, we have the support. As we're having this conversation, I'm having these remembered visions in my head about doing this in the confessional community. Right. And, there are all kinds of things that we can talk about, and we'll get to this later. I think we're going to talk about some cultural trends in future episodes, cultural trends around people who cut other people off. This happens in families more and more. This whole notion of how there are certain dangers that we can incur. We'll talk about the danger of what happens when real victims then become tyrannical. That happens in some of these efforts to repair things. But we just want to say that at the end of the day, two last things. One is that this is a process of communal and neural reintegration, where we get to reactivate the social engagement system, that we bring the middle prefrontal cortex online, where my brainstem and my amygdala are not running the show. And I become an even greater and more integrated whole person that works through things, as we talked about in the last two episodes, timing, tempo, and time. We work through it in that way, but recognizing that when we are paying attention to the community gives us an opportunity for even greater healing, even when the ruptures themselves have taken place in that context. The last thing that we'll say is that sometimes, as Amy knows, sometimes things happen to entire communities. And, we're recording this in mid-February, and we're on the backside of some recent tragic events in Southern California having to do with fires and then rain and landslides and so forth. And we could name all kinds of tragedies all over the place, but particularly because Amy was affected by this, just to name that, and we'll talk more about this next week when we talk about the church, because it's a model for all communities, about what happens when communities themselves are battered by rupture. The rupture that happens to the community. We're going to tackle that next time. But for now, that's what we're looking at in this first part about community when it comes to rupture and repair.
Yeah. We do have an application for you this week. We want to start by asking you, what did you notice from this episode that maybe surprised you? Something that maybe puzzled you? Something that captured your attention? And we want to invite you this week to reflect on the ways communities you have been part of have played roles in ruptures, repairs, or both. And what behaviors did you notice that contributed to effective repairs? What made repair more difficult? What do you notice about how you tell stories that make repair with particular people more challenging? In addition, consider those repairs that you would like to have the assistance from a community to pursue. And as always, we want you to journal about these things and then share them with a trusted friend. Kirk, thank you for today. We're going to be joined by Amy here in just a second on video for those of you who are hanging around. And I want to ask you a question about going back to the Matthew 18, and I have something that I think I've been doing wrong in that all these years, and so I want to talk to you about that in the post show. Mm-hmm. I love you, man.
Love you too, buddy.
All right.
Okay, Pep, I want to know what you're.
Yeah, just quickly. So, I don't know for sure. I mean, I just thought it was as Kurt was going through Matthew 18. I've always felt like the first step, when someone has offended you, like say when someone has sinned against you, like done something to you to cause the trauma. I've always thought that there was like a step before going and talking to them of sort of self-examination. And is this something that I really need to process, like that I can just handle on my own and just let go of? Is it something that I don't really need to dig in with somebody about? Is that is that in line with the scripture and in line with what Yeah.
Yeah, I think it very much is. I think again, I routinely return to human development and family systems as a way to kind of reflect on this. You have kids, and kids will do things that will you want to.
Great example. Yeah.
And you get as we say, it's good to have a second parent in the house, so you talk to them so you don't kill your child.
Right.
It's it's always good.
Yeah, and it's a good thing they're cute, is what I always say.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yes. And I think what Jesus is getting at is that we all develop a certain degree of resilience. I mean, this happens in all kinds of friendship, marriage, where somebody does something and it's merely a flesh wound, right? And we can say, yeah, I understand, I know. I mean, Phyllis has had to put up with a lot with me. And there will be moments, I'm sure, when I do things and she's like, yeah, I can let that go because I know it's going to happen again in another 6 weeks and I'm in for the long haul. And then there are times when you decide, no, I need to talk about this.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we are reflecting on it, the fact that we're not just automatically burying it or automatically just jumping down the other person's throat, the fact that we are pausing long enough to be curious about it so that we can then work through that, so that we can then have a sense and discern, oh, no, this has crossed the threshold, I need to talk to them about that.
Yeah, I do think that if you're talking about, especially like a marriage relationship, the danger can be if you just keep thinking, okay, I'm fine with that. Okay, I'm fine with that. And all of a sudden you start building up resentments, and it's like, wait a minute, whoa.
Right.
Where'd that reaction just come from?
Right. I think
No, go.
No, go.
One of my thoughts was, when do you decide what to let go? And like you said, Pep, if I'm letting it go because I'm anxious and don't want to deal with it, or if I'm minimizing it, but certainly we can't every minor rupture. You can't be like, well, we'll be here all day.
Right, and this gets back to this get back to the thing of again, it's not just the question of am I repairing every rupture? It's the question of what kind of a repairer am I becoming? Right, and so part of the repairing, part of the becoming a good repairer is growing in wisdom, in discerning. Oh, that's something I can let go legitimately because I am aware that what I'm doing, I'm processing that with somebody else maybe, or I've got enough resilience within me to I'm not going to talk about it because I'm okay, not because I'm bearing it. So I'm making a conscious decision to choose not to for reasons that are wise. Not because I'm avoiding it, not because it doesn't, it no longer matters to me.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That clears that up.
Yeah.
I was right.
All along. I remember when you said there's something I thought I'd be doing wrong, I'm like, no, I think we're probably going to get to the bottom of this and we're going to discover that he's been right the whole time.
Yeah.
That's the story of our lives. So,
Yeah. Oh.
Another thing that struck me as you were talking, I thought, are we talking about this work that we're doing enough? Because with the couples, which was amazing, that there were 6 other couples that came in and aided them in this. I thought, and see, you said we don't have a lot of models for this. We don't have, and I thought, are we talking about this enough? Because I mean, I don't hear about it. I don't think I talk about it, but it would be super helpful to know how it goes and how it is challenging and fearful or scary.
Yeah. To the question of are we talking about this enough, I would say I think we're doing 27 episodes of this on this subject now. So I think
we will be. I know.
I think the answer will be yes by the end.
I think it's
because every time Kirk decides he has a subject, he divides it into 6 parts. So today is part 6 of how to not look at someone sideways when you're trying to repair a rupture.
So we will be talking about it enough.
Yeah. So by the end of this season, we will have talked about it plenty.
By the end of this season, in 2029.
You know, I will. This is obviously a joke, but you could have a podcast called Rupture and Repair. And it could just go on and on and on and on. Because it is a subject that's important and is vast and complex.
Yeah, and I'm considering.
Oh, rude. Okay, one more thing that struck me. When, the idea, it didn't start with you, didn't start with me. The idea of repairing ruptures when someone is like historical, like years ago, like from childhood. I imagine that work is imperative. So we really could do a podcast on ruptures, the repairs. Because it's a different kind of work.
Right, it is. I mean, I think again, even as we're talking right here today, and Pep, you've talked about we could make just a whole podcast about this. I think it is in many respects. I tell people when I go to speak someplace, I say, look, when you're done listening to me, you're not going to be a lot smarter because that's not my job. Because all the stuff that we're talking about, like it's just we're talking about all this stuff, and you can't just incorporate this and just now I know it and I own it and so forth. But because my job is not to make you smarter, my job is to inspire you to go home and do the work.
No.
And I think in many respects we're only beginning to scratch the surface here in this in this podcast series, and we're trying to get we want the scratch to be pretty deep enough. But we know that this may lead. We may get feedback from people like, "Could you please do more work on X, Y, or Z?" And we can choose to do that. We can do a breakout mini-series on, the different ways of looking at people when you're repairing a rupture.
Yes.
But I just want to acknowledge that what we're really wanting to do here is to make sure, first of all, is our listeners to know. We want you to know that you're not by yourself in this. That by definition we live in a ruptured world. We live in this world. You will have tribulation. These are Jesus' words, John 16:33. In this world you will have ruptures, and then he says, "But be of good cheer. I want you to be repairers of the breach." And the very act of repairing is going to create its own set of ruptures because evil is not going to like this. And by ruptures, people are not going to receive what you have to offer. It's going to be hard. Yeah. It's going to be difficult. And it's not difficult because we're weak or stupid or not working hard enough at this. And so even in our not having enough time or enough episodes to answer all the questions or to hold all the stories of all the grief, we do want our listeners we want you all to know, you, the most beautiful listeners in the world, we want you to know that we're with you to the degree that we're able to be. And we feel you being with us, just like the three of us are with each other here.
Yep.
Right. Well said. Well said.
Speaking of swag, what did you say, C? I'm not here to make you smarter. I'm here to inspire you to go home and do the work.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun t-shirt.
Oh.
That's a lot of words. I mean,
oh my gosh!
Come on! I mean, it wouldn't fit on a small.
Yep,
it wouldn't fit on a small. I'm telling you that right now.
Wait, what does your T-shirt say? What is that?
Yeah. Wait, stand still.
I just want to take a picture of it so I can then look at my camera and read the paragraph.
Right. Yeah.
There's no bad idea.
Well, we've established that there is. We've already established that it's a bad idea to say there are no bad ideas. All right, you guys. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Love you guys.
Love you.
That was good.
Yeah. Next time.
Good to be with some of you.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.